This video is brought to you by the Professional Photographers of America. Today we're diving into one of the biggest lighting debates in photography, and that is natural light versus flash. I'm going to create 3 different window light looks, first using actual window light, and then using flash in a large softbox. The goal here isn't just to compare them, but to show you just how easy it is to recreate natural window light with flash. That way you don't have to be beholden to whatever the weather is doing or the time of day. I'm going to start off today by showing you 3 comparisons with the images that I shot today with Gael. And I want you to tell me which one is window light and which one is flash down in the comments. You can pick left or right for each one, and I'll let you know at the end which one is which. For as long as I've been a photographer, I've ran across people that said that they only use window light because they think it's way better than flash. But I'm pretty sure that the reason why they think window light is better than flash is because they just don't know how to use flash and they're afraid of it. So my main goal for today's video is to show you just how easy it is to use flash in order to create window light. I am going to be using rather expensive gear in the video today, but just know that I'm going to give you alternatives and that it's not really about gear. You just need to have a large modifier, maybe some V-flats or a second softbox, and possibly some sheer curtains to get the exact same looks that I'm getting today. It really is all about placement and modifier size. The larger the modifier looks to the subject, the softer the light will be, and light coming through a window is usually soft, so we want that modifier to be fairly large, like a 5 to 7 foot umbrella or softbox. By using flash, you won't be beholden to the time of day or the weather, and you'll be able to shoot at lower ISOs and smaller f-stops, which will result in higher image quality. For my first look with Gael, I used an Advantage Gripwear 8x8 foot halo silk and placed it in the open window. The reason why I did this is because the direct sunlight was coming through there and casting a shadow from the window pane onto the background, and I didn't want that kind of look. I just wanted a softer look. If you don't have a scrim like this, you could just use sheer curtains and get vaguely the same look. I also closed the 14 by 9 foot window so that it was only 7 feet wide and 9 feet tall. That was so that I didn't have too much light coming from the side. It was more so coming a little bit in front of him and to the side. Maybe have your legs hang off that side of the box. Yeah. And then even like just come all the way forward so you're just maybe like both feet are down. Yeah, that'll look better. That looks amazing. Then just turn your face that way a little and your eyes back here. I shot a picture of him holding my color checker passport so that I could set a white on the gray card to make sure that I was using the right white balance. If you don't have one of these passports, you could just use a piece of white paper and get vaguely the same results. At first, I tried having a V-flat on camera right in order to bounce a lot of light into the shadows, but I felt like the image was too flat overall. So I folded it in half and placed it over his left shoulder in order to create a kicker or an edge highlight on his left side, which would further separate him from the background. With the window light, I was able to shoot at 1/200th at f4.5 at ISO 800. When you're photographing someone with available light, you want to make sure that you choose a shutter speed of about 1/160th of a second or higher, and this will eliminate a lot of the camera shake or the subtle movements that cause motion blur that the model or yourself are making. When it came time to shoot the image with flash, I moved my Elinchrom Indirect 190 centimeter octabox into position in roughly the same location as the open window. If you don't have one of these softboxes, you could just use a large umbrella. What matters the most is that you place it in roughly the same location as the window and that it looks very large to the subject. If you've got a slightly smaller modifier, just move it a little closer to him so that it takes up the same amount of his field of view as the open window. And just for the record, I didn't move the V-flat on camera right. With flash, I shot at 1/200th of a second at f8 at ISO 100. The light from my softbox was actually softer than the window light, so I removed the diffusion, and because it's an indirect softbox, the light points away from the subject like an umbrella. So if you need to get this exact same amount of contrast, you could just use a large silver umbrella, but it's really not important if you have the same level of contrast. What really matters when you're trying to recreate window light is that you just have a large light source that's fairly soft, coming from the side, but not from below. You want to make sure that the bottom of that modifier is at around jaw level, or more so, make sure the middle of the modifier is higher than the subject's head so that the light will come from slightly above and to the side, and that will mimic the light from the actual sun. As it turned out, I didn't like seeing the shadows from the movie lights back there on the background anyway, so I added the diffusion material and some more props in order to take a better photo in the end. The best part of using flash for this setup was that I ended up with more depth of field, and I didn't have to worry about harsh light coming from the setting sun's direct rays casting a shadow on the background from the window pane. Regardless of the gear you're using, you need to protect it, and that's what the Professional Photographers of America is great for, because their membership comes with equipment insurance. That way you'll be protected whenever anything happens. You could easily knock over a light and damage your gear, or drop something when you're out on location, and just having that little bit of insurance there, assurance in the form of insurance, goes a long way. Also, their policy covers repairs. So if you didn't completely destroy something, you could pay a lower deductible and get your gear fixed on PPA's insurance company. And that's the great thing about a membership with PPA, is that there are so many benefits, including education and business tools for small business owners like us. But the main or first thing that I always mention is equipment insurance. And if you have been a photographer without insurance, you really need to get it. I'm sure all of us that have been doing this for a while have suffered a catastrophic loss before. Mine came about 20 years ago when I left some gear in my car and someone broke in and stole it all. And I'm sure the $6,000 worth of stuff wasn't worth anything to them, but because I had insurance, I got that covered and I was taken care of. I can only imagine how it would have been as a person just starting out in my career if I lost $6,000 worth of gear and it wasn't covered. So please click on the link in the description to find out more about PPA and their insurance, and also get a special discount on your membership. For the second look with Gael, I'm going to move him over to the gray set that I have in the middle of my studio. This image was inspired by a photo that I saw that was taken by Blake Ballard, and I'm showing it to you here so that you can see sort of what the inspiration was and how I was going for a fairly directional quality of light. We started with the two 14 by 9 foot windows open at each corner of my studio with a western exposure at about 3 in the afternoon. Both of these open windows were about 35 feet away. When I took the first test frames, I realized that the light was a little too flat, so I tried to use a V-flat with the black side towards Gael up close. But it turned out I didn't really like that quality of light. So I closed the window on the southwest corner of my studio. That way most of the light was coming from camera left. I then switched the V-flat over to the white side, and it turned out that it was a little too flat, so I took it away. But then I felt like the shadows were a little too deep, so I brought it back, but this time not as close. Not only did it fill in the shadows, it also created a catch light in Gael's eyes, which really brought them to life. The lighting in general was a little bit too split lit for my taste, but I made it work. I should have tried opening the center windows in my studio, which would have made the light come from more of a Rembrandt position rather than split lighting, but I didn't try that in the heat of battle. My exposure was 1/200th of a second f2 at ISO 2500. When I switched over to flash, I used the Elechrome Light Motive 120 centimeter softbox. This modifier has 16 sides. It doesn't really matter which softbox it is in general, just know that it's a 4-foot softbox. If I only had a 3-foot softbox, I just would have moved it a little bit closer to Gael in order to get the same exact effect. What was important here was that the modifier took up the same amount of his field of view as the window. So I stood in his location and I looked at the modifier and I looked at the open window and I adjusted the position of the modifier until I got it in the exact location so that it was the same size as the open window. Now I'm having to do this because I'm trying to get the exact same quality of light with flash as I was getting with window light. So if you're doing this on your own and you're not trying to recreate a look like I am, you don't have to worry so much about where the flash is positioned. And just so you know, it was maybe about 12 to 15 feet from him. That's about 4 to 5 meters away. Because my softbox ended up being closer to him than the window, the corner of my set was a little bit brighter. And so I added a 4x8 piece of foam core in order to flag off the corner so I could darken it down when I took the photo. I also propped a 4x4 flag against a chair in order to darken down the floor in my flash exposure. Now, if you don't have one of these fancy flags, you could just use any piece of foam core or really anything that's going to create a block between your light source and the subject. I was able to shoot at 1/200th of a second at f8 at ISO 500. The flash wasn't at full power, so I could have turned it up a little bit higher and then reduced my ISO. After I captured an image with flash that was identical to the window light image, I moved the light closer to the camera so that I would end up with a more Rembrandt lighting pattern and get some light under his left eye over here on camera right. And the great thing about flash is that you can put it wherever you want, so you don't have to be beholden to wherever the sun is or wherever your window is located. And I actually think that this image with flash is better than the window lit image. But again, it is possible that I could have opened those middle windows in my studio and got the same look with window light. Now, as we look at a final comparison here between the window lit image on the left and the flash image on the right, you can see that the flash image is a lot sharper because the ISO is a lot lower and the f-stop is a lot higher. And that's one of the great benefits of using flash over window light. For the third look, I placed my Advantage Gripwear Halo Scrim into the window. Now, again, you don't have to use some expensive professional gear like this, although I think it was only about $100. You could just use some sheer curtains and get roughly the same effect. What was important here is that I wanted to have a nondescript background so that the focus would be on the subject and not what was out the window. In addition, it was sunny and in the afternoon, and so that sun would have come directly through the window and struck Gael. And I didn't want that sort of specular highlight sort of look. I placed my camera lower to the ground in order to get more of a heroic image of him, but also primarily to avoid having the windowsill in the photos. Because the sun was hitting the scrim directly, it was very bright and my exposure was 1/200th of a second at f6.3 at ISO 400. I added a V-flat on camera right so that I could bounce more of the light back into his face since the sun was on camera left. I then switched over to Capture One's Beyond Film styles because I wanted to have this image in black and white, and it's always a good idea when you're shooting for black and white that you monitor in black and white in real time so that you get an idea of how the preset is going to affect your final shot. If you don't use Capture One, I actually have presets that simulate these looks, and I will link to them in the description. I started to feel like the V-flat was wrapping light around him a little bit too much, and the shadows on the camera side were a little too elevated. So I moved the V-flat closer to the window in order to darken those shadows while still getting light on his face. I then decided to move in a little closer and zoom out to 50 millimeters on my Canon RF 28 to 70 millimeter lens because I wanted a more intimate feeling shot, and I knew that that low angle with that focal length would make him feel even more heroic in the final image. Before moving on to flash, I measured the light from every angle with my light meter so that I would know exactly how bright I needed the light to be when I was using flash. Once I completed my notes, I moved everything about 8 feet from the window in order to make room for my softbox. I then took the scrim and leaned it up against the love seat. I then rolled my Elinchrom 190 centimeter or 75 inch indirect octabox into position. Again, you don't have to have this exact modifier. You could just use a large 5 foot 150 centimeters or 7 foot umbrella and get roughly the same results. You also could use a sheer curtain instead of the scrim. Here's an example of some lighting that I got when I used sheer curtains and a 5-foot octabox during a workshop that I was teaching in Phoenix. For this shot with Gael, I turned up the power on my strobe until I got an exposure of 1/200th of a second, f6.3 at ISO 500. I then closed the drapes to ensure that none of the window light would have any effect on my shot. And in case you're wondering, the light that I'm using to shoot the video didn't have an effect on my exposure either. And here's an image that I took without flash and just the video lights, and you can see that it's having no effect on the exposure. Now, when I started testing things out, at first there wasn't enough light on the front of his body, and I realized that my softbox was a little too far over on camera left, so I moved it over on camera right, or in order to be centered with his body. And then I measured the light, and the exposure on all 3 sides was the same exposure that I was getting with the window light by itself. Once I had the light in the right place, I powered up the strobe so that I could shoot at 1/200th of a second at f6.3, but this time at ISO 100. And now you can see a comparison here with available light on the left and flash on the right. And as you can see, they're substantially the same. And this just goes to show you that you can get the same look that you want with flash as you can window light. And you don't have to worry about the weather or the time of day. You can get the light that you want whenever you want it. And that is the best thing about using flash over window light. You just need to use a large modifier, some V-flats, and possibly some sheer curtains, and you can get the exact same look with flash as you can window light. Since you've made it all this way to the end of the video, I want to share with you which light was which in those original comparisons. Starting off, we had window light on the left and flash on the right. Then we had flash on the left and window light on the right. And finally, we had window light on the left and flash on the right. And you can see how hard it is to discern which one is which when looking at them here. I'm going to link to all the gear that I used in the description. If you click on those links, that'll help support me to make more videos like this one. Also, click on the link in the description to get a special discount on your PPA membership. If you want to take things to the next level, consider checking out the Academy with John Gress, my online members-only learning platform, or attend an in-person workshop. Remember to like, subscribe, and sign up for the bell, and I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon.